So now that we're tracking all of our files, let's go ahead and see how to use Git to track changes to those files. So the first change we're going to make is to edit US states, and let's add a state. Let's say we add the state Alabama. Go ahead and save this. And now, if you run git status, you'll see that it tells us US states has been modified. There's another command we can use to see the specifics of the changes, and that is git diff. If you press enter, this is something else that like git log, as long as the output fits on one screen, it'll just output. If it needs to pass over more than one screen, it'll be paged through less. And notice how it's telling us the change. It tells us, or it shows us a couple lines around the change, and it indicates that this line was added because it's in green and there's a little plus sign. Alright. Let's go ahead and edit that a little further. Let's delete a state, like Indiana. Go ahead and save again, and if we run git status, it still tells us that US states has been modified, and git diff now shows us Alabama has been added since the last commit, and Indiana has been deleted since the last commit. It shows up in red, and there's a little minus sign near the beginning. And so specifically, this is the difference between the last commit and what's called the working directory. Remember, the working directory is essentially changes that you've made to the code since the last commit. This will come up more in the second lesson when we start dealing with branching, but it's important to recognize that the working directory is always applied to the last commit, even if the last commit changes. Again, we'll see more about that in branching. It doesn't really come up until you start branching, but just be aware of how that works. Let's edit another file now. Let's go ahead and edit the months file in the time periods folder. This time, what I want to do is abbreviate January, and then have also August, September, and October. So we've switched January, August, September, October to their abbreviated forms. Go ahead and save. Git status will now tell us that two files have been modified. And if we were to run git diff, it will tell us the changes for each file. So let's look at these headers a little bit more carefully. So the bold part tells us information about what we're actually looking at. So the most important thing to look at is this first line, which tells us that we're first looking at the difference in the months.txt. So that way we know which file we're looking at. And if we look through here, so this is telling us a little bit about the reference to those files. That's less important right now. Just focus on the fact that this is the months file. And it's showing us the changes right here. Now notice that the way Git represents an edited line is as a deletion and an addition paired. And also notice that it groups the three changed lines here. Notice that it is showing us the difference for two files. So here we can see the difference for usstates.txt. Alabama was added, Indiana was removed. Now you can imagine, for now, it's not a big deal that we're seeing all the changes for the entire repository, because it's a small repository. But if this was a very big repository, you might want to narrow this down a little bit. You can do that if you just include the name of the file after git diff. If you do this, notice that after this command, it only shows us the difference between the last commit and the working directory from months.txt. It's not showing us US states. Let's go ahead and edit the last file, days of week. And this time I want to move the line Sunday to the end, just to make it more of a European ordering of days, I suppose. Save, and just one more time to review, git status now shows us that all 3 files have been modified, and diff shows us the changes. So notice that it cannot recognize that you've actually moved this line that says Sunday down to the end. It treats it as a deletion and an insertion. You'll also notice that because this is extending just off the screen, now instead of a command line, I've got this colon and cursor here, which indicates that I'm actually in less, and I can scroll up and down, and when I'm done I need to hit Q to go back to the command line. Now it's important to recognize, and we can see this if we do git status, just because a file has been modified does not mean that it's automatically staged. Just like adding new files, we stage changes using the git add command. So if we did git add usstates.txt, if we did git status now, it would show us that usstates.txt has been modified and that this is to be committed. It's staged. Alright. So now we're going to go ahead and commit this, just like before. Remember the command is git commit, and we have edited usstates.txt to show how git tracks changes. Now we don't have any new files, but we do have a modified file, usstates.txt. In this case, we added and removed one state each to show how git diff works. So again, you can see how this log, or this commit message, really gives us a starting point for understanding what happened in this commit. Here's the overall purpose of the change, and here's the specific files that were modified. Go ahead and save this. And if we ran git status again, now the 2 time period files still show up as having been modified, but usstates does not. That's because, just like we don't need to add all the files in the repository at once, we don't need to add all the changes at once. And in fact, it's very useful to be able to only commit the changes that you're ready to do so with. So if these were code files and usstates was working perfectly, maybe it's a utility function that these call. You've got that fixed and it's working beautifully, and you want to freeze that commit. But these aren't quite ready yet. That's fine, you can do that. So now let's say that we're ready to commit these. Let's show you a new way, and it's actually this way right here, git commit -a. This is basically a shortcut that says go ahead and add all changes and go ahead and start the commit process right away. Note that this will not add untracked files. This only adds changes to already tracked files. So this time, we're not going to use git add. Instead, we're going to say git commit -a, and we hit enter. You'll notice that it tells us that the changes to be committed include both of the files that we modified. So again, edited the time periods files to show more about diffs. And this time we have 2 modified files, time periods days of week txt, moved Sunday to end, and time periods / months.txt, abbreviated for months, to point out how git diff handles modified lines. So when you're satisfied with the commit message, go ahead and save it. And once again, git status is completely clean.